and they're looking around. We're going to search around the camp. This is obviously a place where people have camped before. I'm going to search around. And I said, stacked very neatly behind a fallen log, almost covered by leaves, is 2,000 copper pieces. What? Why? Going around. And afterwards, after the game was over, he goes, why? I'm like, back in 1984, a party had too much encumbrance and they hid the copper pieces there, and so they come back for them. They never did.
Welcome to the Red Caps Podcast, a podcast where we dip our caps into the blood of our listeners and we ramble on about old school games. Today, I sit down with Rick Stump, who has an AD&D campaign that has been ongoing since 1979, and he also runs the Don't Split the Party blog. If you want to hear somebody who is very passionate about our hobby and has great insights into campaign and domain play, then as always, I hope you can sit back, listen, and enjoy.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am joined by Rick Stump of Don't Split the Party fame. Rick, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great today. How about you?
I'm doing well, thank you. You've got a very prolific blog that's been going on for a long while, YouTube channels, a podcast, a fairly successful Discord channel, and all kind of centering around the fact that you've been playing a game that we all love for several decades now. Yeah. How long has the campaign been going on this year, as of this year?
In August, it'll be 45 years of the same campaign of first edition going on.
And for people that maybe didn't come up through old school gaming, when we say campaign, we're not talking a...
Oh, sure. Yeah, the meanings drifted a lot, especially I'd say the last 12 years. What I mean is I created a gaming world that I call Seaward. And in the last 45 years, I've had roughly 92 players come through and go into the same world with multiple characters. The longest hiatus I ever had was actually not too long ago when I was badly hospitalized. And by the way, you mentioned my blog and stuff. The blog, podcast, YouTube channel, I took a bit of a break. I was hospitalized off and on for basically an injury. And that was the longest break. But yeah, so we've had 92 players sharing a world, and that world is continuing to go, just like Greyhawk or Eberron or Forgotten Realms for 45 years.
So with 45 years, we do the math real quick. We're talking 1979.
Yes.
And that would be right after all three of the AD&D books come out.
It was the month that the Dungeon Master's Guide was available where I lived. Absolutely.
Was there a game before AD&D?
There was. I actually, it's a story I've told before. I was going to a gaming thing at Ball State University in Indiana when I was 9 years old with my father, and my babysitter was playing OD&D with her boyfriend and some others. She insisted to let me play. I did. They let me, on what do you want to do? I'll go first. I fell into a pit trap like 30 feet into the dungeon and died instantly. And I said, well, now what? And they're like, oh, you make a new character. I'm like, oh, I was hooked. So I really thank her for having me play. And they were very nice. These are college kids. They coached me. They taught me a lot. They talked to my dad about how to get me books. And then before you know it, I was playing with, I should say, high school, middle school kids. And my babysitter continued to help coach me for years. So I played a lot of OD&D. Didn't really try dungeon mastering for real until later. And then I got the AD&D books as they came out because it was a delay. You had the Monster Manual, then about a year later, the Player's Handbook. About a year later, the DMG. And by that time, I felt ready. So I just got the DMG and a week later started the campaign.
Yeah, it's interesting that people with the current edition of D&D or the upcoming edition of D&D, there's a bunch of people that are like questioning the whole, why are the books coming out so far spaced apart, what have you? And it's like, this isn't new.
No, it's not new at all. Well, not that, but one thing that I really appreciate, I've got a blog post from about 9 years ago about this, is people don't appreciate when I had I think it was my Men in Magic, when it was destroyed in an accident, like a Coke spilled on it and this, that, and the other. It took me months to find another copy to get it. It's not like modern world where I can get on Amazon and get a hard copy or you get the PDF. So there was a lot of sort of mix and matching going on back then. When the Arduin Grimoire came out, basically a guy's set of house rules. It was passed around and people would steal from it because you didn't have a lot of access to a lot of new ideas. Dragon Magazine was a must. But yeah, it was a very different world. But staggered release has always been here. Darn it.
So you mentioned that the current campaign is existing in standard world. A ton of people, when they sit down, they hear about world building and they get excited about world building.
Sure.
And they will stress and spend months or sometimes years pre-creating a world before a player has ever encountered it.
Well, absolutely. I've seen that. Yeah.
Before you started doing this campaign, how much of that world actually existed?
When I sat down, I had a sheet of notebook paper, not graph paper, a sheet of notebook paper where I'd used a ruler to try to put in distances, and had a town called Seward, a coastline, Seward's on the coast, a river, and then the other side of the river was the Good Wizard's Tower, and about 20 miles away was where the pirates are. That was it.
And do you remember what the first set of adventures were that happened in this world?
Absolutely. Some friends of mine and one of my friend's sister made basically the 5-man band, and they went and they fought the pirates. And the thief and the magic user got killed. They went back to town, rolled up some new characters. I asked them all, hey, everyone make a spare character, which started a trend that continues to this day. And they went back and kept going. And over the course of about 4 to 6 months, they dealt with the pirates and did some exploring and expanded the map. And it went on like that.
So you mentioned that there's been 90 plus players. How many characters do you think that is between all those?
Probably at least 350 to 400.
And is there a mass graveyard, or do you have like a wall of shame somewhere that anybody who falls down the pit in their first adventure, like you did, ends up with their character sheet on display somewhere or anything along those lines?
We do have a few. There's some famous ones. There's a place on the map called Bald Knob, where an entire party went out in a TPK and did their best to take everyone with them. That's pretty famous in the campaign. Because the wizard had a necklace of missiles, they're getting overrun by an orcish army, and he said, hit me with a fireball, I'm going to blow my save on purpose. And that was fun. There's a few others. Sneaky Pete and the way he died in Skull Mountain, which I called it a super dungeon then. It's my mega dungeon. He's pretty famous because if you find Sneaky Pete's hidey hole, it's a sort of a trick to get you into deeper levels and have a safe space to go. There's a lot of stuff like that, but you have to understand, between 79 and about 92, I was in school or in the military, and a lot of the players and the characters that came in would come in, they'd play 12, 13 sessions and be gone. Because of the changes, especially at Fort Bragg. I was at Bragg for 6 years, and I was co-DMing with Lou Pulsifer, the famous game designer. And he had his campaign Tanilda, I had my campaign Seaward, and we would alternate back and forth who was DMing and who was playing. And you'd have a soldier come in, play 2-3 sessions, and then get posted somewhere or move on. So about half of those players and a little over half of those characters were only there for a few sessions. But many of them did stick around. For example, my longest player, there's a person in my group who's been playing continuously in the campaign for 31 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So has there been, do you tend to try to play AD&D as close to rules as written, or do you guys have a extensive set of house rules that have built up over the several decades? Or
I'm going to reply with the 45 years that yes. When I first started playing, I'd had 2 years with Monster Manual, Year of the Player's Handbook. I'd read them multiple times. I get the Dungeon Master's Guide. I'll read a couple of times. And I try to stick to as close as possible rules as written. Now, that's tricky. For example, I like to point out to people that in a real way, you can't play AD&D rules as written because there's at least one directly contradictory rule in the books. But I did draw that for a long time. I experimented with stuff. I tried, Arms Law for a couple months when Arms Law first came out from Rollmaster. I had a group of just 4 players. We were trying arms law. Didn't like it. Put it away. I tried 3 or 4 different initiatives and combat sequences until I settled on one that I like that I've been using since about 1984, 85. I've added classes, I've added races, I've added monsters, spells, magic items. I've got a book on drive-through, and this is a bit of a plug, called Far Realms, and it is most of my house rules that are consistent for years and years. Not stuff I've experimented with, but stuff I keep. Like, I've had the expert hireling the healer that has a percentage chance over time to fix you from level drain or poisoning or something. That is one example. I've added NPC only classes that player characters can't run, and I use that to explain why there's not a lot more high-level player characters. So instead of an NPC town guard is going to be a man at arms, not a fighter.
Right.
A lot of the members of your thieves guild are going to be scoundrels, not thieves. The village priest at the parish is not a cleric; he's a religious brother. Things like that. So a fair amount of drift. I would say the house rules that we use consistently for years is about 135 pages. Yeah.
So would you?
But I include spells and magic items and stuff. Yeah.
Are those largely coming from solving problems that you experience at the table, or is it more of over the years you've seen other editions or other games and you're just kind of picking what you're like, oh, that was a really good idea, we should have tried that, or that?
I'd say it's 90% solving problems. For example, I have my own initiative system. It's vaguely described on a blog post. It's in a couple of things I sell. If you come over to my Discord, which is Don't Split the Party, I'll gladly share it with you. But I came up with it because I did not like. I have a couple of pet peeves. One, I don't like I go, you go. Right. I do not like it when everybody on this side does everything all at once, and then when they're done, everyone on the other side does everything all at once.
Right.
I find that it destroys the very concept of tactics or planning, and it prevents you from doing a lot of simple, innovative things on the tabletop you should be able to do. So I use segmented rounds. So there's 10 segments per round, for example, and your characters can move every segment that they're not surprised or held or something. And their initiative order is the first time they can do something substantive: start a spell, fire a bow, attack with a weapon. And that's true for everybody on the battlefield. And then I do initiative by side, although I often will, if players have a lot of henchmen, they roll 1 for the whole team. Like, I've got one player right now, he's got 12 henchmen. So he rolls 1 for him and 1 for his henchmen. If it's a big battle. And then every segment, okay, who's moving where, who's doing what. We use a grid, we move them around, we see what's going on. And oddly enough, I did that, and it really, really sped up combat. I made it a lot faster.
I'm gonna say a sentence to you, and I want you to complete it for me. I think I know which way you're going to answer, but I'm curious. D&D is actually just a blank game.
Resource management game.
That's exactly what I thought you were going to say. So, and I agree. And I agree with you completely.
Don't say it's a resource management game, sure.
But yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a resource management game as well. That a lot of rules get kind of brushed under the rug for the sake of what people think is going to be convenience, and it ends up fundamentally changing the game dramatically. Things like encumbrance, what have you. Can you speak a little bit into why you think it's a resource management game, and how kind of skipping some of those rules may impact things?
Well, let me give you a perfect example that I use in a very long form essay for my blog. That's, I'll admit, the second most popular read thing on my blog. It's really, really tempting and easy to say, you guys are in the inn, you guys want to go to the super dungeon, the mega dungeon. So 3 days later, you're at the entrance of the dungeon and you're going in. What do you do? And then not worry about, do they have any candles? Do they have any food? Just go fight monsters. It's very tempting. It can be very fun. But in a very real way, it's like playing Mech Warrior. Ask your parents' kids. And turning off heat and ammo, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the example I give is there's a section of the area around my mega dungeon is sort of a keep out zone. Almost no water, no food, rugged terrain. So it'll take adventurers, 4 to 8 days of travel to get to the entrance to the mega dungeon. And then if you want to do anything serious, you're going to be underground for days. So at one point, the players decided getting through that area, the briars around it, is really difficult. But the rules say if you have a comprehensive map, you can't get lost. So we can cut through and not get lost. So let's map everything. And we did, I think it was 18 months of real time of weekly adventures over the course of three years game time, I think it was. Because I have a strict in-game clock. And yeah, I'm pretty sure it was 3 winters in game. They had to supply a group of player characters and NPCs and such in the field of about 20 people and a base camp of about 20 people inside a mountain in a remote area. So they ended up buying every cart and wagon they could for 50 miles, all the mules they could for 80 miles. They had to set up merchants in various towns to buy things for them and ship things to them. They drove up the price of food so much that the peasants started getting mad because the poor were going hungry. The cascade effects went down to, you can't buy any more torches. They're out of, the guys that make torches are out. You can't get candles anymore. You have to ship in oil from overseas. Everything's getting expensive. And while that doesn't sound sexy, shall we say, the fact of the matter is it forced them to interact with the local baron, the local archbishop, the local peasants, force them, okay, we have to send out agents. It demanded that they actually interact with the game world in a very meaningful way. It demanded that they weren't just, whenever I hear, you're just doing dungeon crawling. If you do resource management, they can't do just dungeon crawling. You've got to get, we need 50 pounds of light sources a day. Where's it coming from? We need, on and on and on. So the reason it's a resource management game is because it comes out of war games. And war games are inherently about resource management, whether it's just the number of troops or it's down to, how much fuel does your Panzer need as part of the North Africa campaign, if you want to talk about some of the board games that exist. Turning that in here, interesting enough, I'm firmly of the opinion that forcing resource management to be significant makes your role-playing required and more important.
So it's a case of limitation sparks creativity. You've now got a new set of problems.
I'm about to say, in one sentence, you summarized, about 3 years of me writing stories. Yes, limitations force creativity. I'm gonna steal
it. You mentioned you have a in-game clock, and the whole classic. A meaningful campaign cannot be without
you have to have
time records.
Blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you go through with a kind of like a one-to-one time between game sessions, or is there how does that work for you? So
the default is pretty simple. Time passes in game as it passes in game. If you're in between sessions and there's nothing going on, for example, if you're in the middle of a dungeon, Skull Mountain has never been even close to fully explored. The maps actually kind of scare me. There's so many notebooks and stuff that I have an index of where stuff is about my mountain. Let's say you fought your way, you used a lot of stuff, you're down 14 miles down the Eastern Caverns, and it's 2 a.m. on Sunday night. Okay, let's stop here, go home, we'll get back to it Friday. Those guys are frozen in time, right? And they've got their own little where are they in the time and calendar inside the universe. On the other hand, they're like, oh man, we got back. We'll when can we play next? No, next Thursday. Okay, that's 8 days from now. Okay, everybody. In the meantime, let me know what you're doing over those 8 days. And 8 days go by the time in the game world, right?
Yeah, it's a concept that has been talked about a bunch recently on in online RPG discussions, and it seems like everything you've described there makes complete sense to me, and I find it difficult.
That's what it describes in the book.
Yeah, and I have a hard time trying to figure out why there's a whole segment of people that can't seem to grasp that. I
don't think they can't grasp it. I just think that they propose, in their opinion, it makes things simpler for them to manage. And I think that if you're not used to it, and it's especially if you're new to the game and you're neck deep on day one, maybe it does. I know that I experimented with one time all the time when I was in high school over the summer, and we all had time off, and I dropped it pretty quickly simply because I'm like, man, we're all going to need 14 more characters, and it's not helping anything.
Right.
Was my opinion. And I know that plenty of people have done it for various things. There's a guy on my Discord who ran huge live action role playing, and they used one time simply because you got hundreds of people in different cities, and that's just the easiest way to keep track of it. So it's certainly useful. And I've got a couple guys on my Discord that use it one time all the time. They swear by it, and I say, fine, good. If it works for you, it works for you. But and I don't really. I've known some people like it's the only way to do it. Well, that's not true. Other people are doing it and doing very well. But I've also seen people say you should never do it because it's not the rules. Well, it seems to be working well for a lot of people. I'm not going to say don't do it. I think that boils down to the purity test. You get anything from additions to, BX is the only way. No, AD&D is the only way. There's always these sorts of people taking extreme positions. But in reality, like I said, I got a couple pals of mine that use one time. Works for them. Go for it. Proud of them. Sure.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think the
guys
nerd
saying,
sniping.
I don't understand it. I think they're just taking on an extreme position, and that's okay. Sure.
Yeah, like I've had people try to tell me like what? So your combat's running on a per minute. I'm like, no, that's not how it works. Right. No. While you're playing the game, you play it completely normal, and yeah, it seems to just be an interesting twisting of it, almost to try to prove a point, or like you said,
I swear that people just create drama because they want drama. I don't know.
Yeah, you've mentioned Skull Mountain a couple of times.
Sure.
And you were saying that it's your mega dungeon.
Mm-hmm.
What was the design process for that like? Are you using the rules from
I'm going to be really honest. Remember in the old basic book, there's that side view of a mountain. I think it was called Stone Mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a deep shaft going to a lake, and then there's an entrance through a mouth.
You just stole that?
12-year-old Rick said, dude, that's cool. And that's how it started when I was 12. I started, it's literally, there's a place called The Deep. It's an 1,800-foot shaft that goes down to a lake. And there's all sorts of entrances off of it. And then there's a skull-shaped cavern at the top of the mountain. You go in, and there's all sorts of levels below it. It has changed and grown a bit over the 35, 38 years that people have actually been getting to it. But that's how it started. Literally just, that's cool. I'm going to steal an image for that book.
So when you're sitting down mapping it out, you said you've got books and books and books of various maps for it.
I think I'm up to 4 full tablets of graph paper, 3 tablets of hex paper, and I think 22 notebooks. Yeah.
So when you're sitting down, is this a I've got some free time, I'm going to sit here and doodle out another floor of the map, or is it only coming about as players are going through it and you're kind of making it up on the fly, or where
it's much more the former. There've been 1 or 2 things I've had to do on the fly when I wasn't done mapping a section yet. But that's been very rare, especially for the last 20 years. Indeed, one of my most active face-to-face players for the last 15 years is famous for saying, there is no campaign. It's just Skull Mountain. He's like, the moons are actually inside the mega dungeon. Trust me, but most of it was that way. But there's also been a huge amount of input. 3 full levels of the dungeon were created by player characters.
Oh, really?
Yeah, 3 full levels were created by player characters. 2 of the biggest sort of events, or 4 or 5 of the biggest, shall we say, tourist destinations were made by player characters. And a lot of other stuff was inspired by stuff player characters are doing outside the mountain. For example, right now, amongst the active players, 2 of them live full-time inside the mega dungeon.
So, has there been anybody else other than you that's DM'd in this world?
Yes. Let's see. I had my sister Doris DM'd about 14 games back when we were both in high school together. My friend George DM'd an entire section. He had, I'm like, you've got this side of this mountain range. That's you. And we'll just meet every Thursday or Friday or Saturday and compare what's going on and talk in between. This is long before cell phones and stuff. And when I was at Bragg between about 88 and 92, I had two guys running sections, locations inside Seaward. And then from 92 to 95, one of those guys continued on. But since then, it's been solely me. For example, George, we were doing Oriental Adventures, and I made Yashima, which is Japanland.
Okay.
And he got it all up, and then like George was running that, and he's running. So you're doing Oriental Adventures. He was running it for years and years, and then we had some stuff in a distant land called Robias, and I had guys dungeon mastering there. Now it was still I had GM fiat, and I could say yes or no to big things, but they did a lot of work down in there with what I had. I mean, well, here's the map. Here's a lot of NPCs, and they get together. I'm thinking about this guy. I'm thinking of bringing this guy in. So yeah, there's been some collaborative dungeon mastering for off and on for years. It's just been a while.
Have you played in those, or?
I did play in Yashima myself. I had a couple characters there, and I very briefly played in what we call the Robian area, just because I wanted to see how the players are going. The players there, I'd never met them before, and I wanted to make sure that they were having a good time. And so I sat in for like 4 or 5 sessions.
Okay. Did you find it weird kind of playing in the world that you normally sit behind the screen on and run? Or actually,
that's not really natural. The biggest problem I had was not using my meta knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really tough.
That actually, I guess I said something there that sparked a question. There are most of these games being held, I guess historically they would have been almost all in person. Nowadays, are they still remaining largely in person, or is it moved to
about 80% in person? I've got there's guys in my Discord. I do a Discord game. I'm trying to get it more frequently now that my health is improving, to at least twice a month, if not more frequent. It's a ton of fun. They're in the main area. Their characters interact with the characters from the tabletop group routinely, and one of the guys from the tabletop group is a position where it's easier for him to play remotely for a while, so he's in the Discord team. So yeah, they slotted right in, and I would hope to, like I said, once my health gets better, I wouldn't even mind having another full Discord group on there.
So do you find some of the traditional trappings of D&D, things like DM screens and minis and grid play, what have you? Are you using those, or are you with your Discord group? Are you using a VTT to make that happen, or is it more theater of the mind? And
I've been doing primarily theater of the mind for ages. I like using grids. I have some actually dedicated big grid maps I use. So if it's a confusing area or it's a really large battle, we'll break out the grids. But I've been primarily 90% or more theater of the mind for at least 25 years.
And as the players are going through and they're discovering things, has there been one of my favorite books is the Rogues Gallery, and
oh yeah,
at the end of the Rogues Gallery you get a little history of some of the named characters that have appeared in D&D history. Do you kind of have that in your world, where there is characters that have either been retired or they met a tragic end that have really shaped the world that everybody seems to know about or will learn about depending on where they go?
Well, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I've got an image. I might even be able to send it to you in a minute. Most of the major towns and cities and roads on the campaign map were made by player characters. Okay. As you can imagine, over 45 years, I've had a lot of people reach domain level. I currently have, I want to say, 9 active PCs at a domain level. So of the major, like in the Kingdom of Seaward, which is the main play area, which is not that large, every city on the map, except for the capital, of the human kingdom and the capitals of the 2 elven kingdoms were made by PCs. So there's this tremendous accumulation of background and information and lore that comes out from these PCs. Lou Pulsifer had a character named Orion that got to domain level, domained in the far west, established the city of Cull, has a domain out there. Well, Lou hasn't played actively with me for ages. He lived in North Carolina, moved to Florida. I was living all over the country. This is long before the internet. But that character, because of potions of longevity and elixirs of youth, etc., is still around, and he's not really an NPC. About once a month, I get a hold of Lou, or if there's something big's going on with him, I'll say, "Hey, Lou, this is what's going on. What's Orion do? Oh, he's going to do this." So these are still around, and the last time Lou played was 1992. But contemporary characters can bump into him. I can't remember how hideously old his wizard is in game, and get feedback from a player who was playing, back when the Soviet Union was still around. And there's a lot of stuff like that. The Order of the Starry Banner was established by a paladin back in, I want to say, 1984, and they still run into members of that, and so on and so forth. You can even, one of the players who plays Seeker, who is probably effectively the highest level character that's common right now. He likes this a lot, and I'm going to brag on myself. They're in the far western wilderness. They're traveling along the map. I'm looking at the map. I'm like, oh yeah, and they're looking around. We're going to search around the camp. This is obviously a place where people have camped before. I'm going to search around, and I said, stacked very neatly behind a fallen log, almost covered by leaves, is 2,000 copper pieces. What? Why? You go around, and afterwards he's like, after the game was over, he goes, why? I'm like, back in 1984, a party had too much encumbrance, and they hid the copper pieces there, and so they come back for them. They never did.
That's sort of a message, especially if you get that to somebody who hasn't been in a campaign for any length of time. Must be kind of like a mind-blowing experience for them to be like, oh really?
Like, what? Yeah, I'm like, yeah, I'm like, that's a long time ago. That was, at the time, 38 years before, 37 years before it happened. And the player was 25. It was before his parents met, and that stuff does happen. And you have a buildup. I was on Thunder Moose's podcast not too long ago, and I talked about how the interaction of player characters with the world comes up with some incredible stuff. And that just builds up over time. And plenty of contemporary players will run into graffiti left in the mega dungeon by previous players and leave their own. And I'm carefully mark it down. And I'm very much hoping another 20 years, another generation of players will go in there and find more graffiti.
You mentioned how many people are at domain levels and what they've managed to do with that in terms of creating up cities and what have you. A lot of people who play Dungeons and Dragons never reach domain levels. They go through the levels 1 through 5, and then they fizzle out or they start something new.
Sure, it's very common. I mean, again, like I said earlier, I've had a lot of guys get to 5th level or so and leave the campaign or make new characters, whatever. Myself, sure.
So, can you describe to those who may not have ever played it what changes once you reach domain level? What sort of new windows open up in gameplay for it?
Well, one of the most interesting things is domain level. You start entering a new thing. The highest level characters that have ever been played, first level up, and that's how I do it. I try not to Monty Hall and have people start at 4th, 5th level. Or oddly enough, a 14th level paladin, a 14th level wizard, and another 14th level wizard, and all of them sort of like, well, we're stepping away now. And a lot of guys domain level start to step away because the difference between life and death gets narrower and narrower as you go up in level, which sounds contradictory. But when you're 5th level and you're fighting a bunch of orcs, you're probably going to win, but if you have to weigh the numbers, you can get out of there. When you're 12th level and you're fighting like 3 Metzodemons, you tend to either win or get curb stomped. And that difference gets harder and harder to figure out both as a dungeon master and a player. I let the dice fall as they may. Things are set up. It's harder to judge. So there's a bit, the fear factor actually goes up at that level because the danger is so much higher. And two, if you actually decide to domain, and of those characters are domain level, only about half of them have made their domain so far. They're domain level, but they're not domained.
Right.
Once you're domained, it uses up a lot of game time. The character Bridget just domained in the West. She has a large county she's in charge of, and she borders on humanoid territory. So the player talks to me effectively every week. Here's my patrols are going. Here's why I'm paying for food. It's a resource management game, and the resource management demands go way up as a domain owner. Not so much you don't have fun, but your challenges become much more strategic, which is why I think some players decide I'm domain level, but I'm not domaining yet. I want to stay tactical instead of strategic. But the people who do go to strategic tend to really love it, and it turns into a rather different game at that point, where your resource management includes things like, what are my relationship with neighboring kingdoms, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so typically most people would give the advice that if you've got a party of players, don't allow PvP happening between your players. But once you get to domain level, I got to assume,
unavoidable.
Yeah, you're going to have conflicts between players because they're both competing for similar resources.
Famously, it was player versus player animosity that led to one of the most interesting domain events in the campaign ages ago, 40 years ago almost. A friend of mine was in the game. Well, usually it's all friends. We're playing, and he had a character. There's a long thread on my Discord. You can look it up. But it basically boiled down to his character, not the player, but the character being played carefully, felt that he had been disrespected and dishonored and insulted by the NPC King of Seaward. So he decided that his domain was going to compete with them. So he made a city on the coast, up away with a port. And because he was chaotic good, sort of neutral, was very, very much opposed to and antipathetic towards Seaward. As one person has recently put it, he ran off and goes, I'm going to make my own Seaward, but with blackjack and hookers.
Yeah.
Right? So he ran off and did that, and that is still a thorn in the side of all the players, because you get this relatively small but wealthy and powerful city-state that really hates the NPC king and everybody aligned to him. So that dynamic ages later is still there, and you have to deal with that. And that's basically the multi-generational impact of a guy of basically player versus player, because he was mad at the king, but it was player actions that caused him to be mad at the king. And it happens, especially now when we have so many people at domain level. Some sort of conflict is almost inevitable.
When you talk about the campaign and we listen to you tell these stories, often the events seem like you're talking about things that have actually happened to you, which is the way that I find the best people that have stories from D&D. It's not my characters did this or what have you. It's I did this, and it's very first person, and it's almost a memory to them rather than.
Well, I think that's a sign of a good game. Yeah.
How do you differentiate that over this number of years and keep things straight? What's your note taking like if when you're doing a session, how often are you just scribbling away on a notebook trying to keep things straight, or is it an after action report, or how do you?
I take pretty extensive notes. I take very extensive notes. I have not had a birthday, Father's Day, Christmas in years where I did not get multiple notebooks as gifts, just as a gimme. A box of pens and 5 notebooks is just, I'm getting it on a holiday. And I go through them. I actually have, I have 2 sets of large bookshelves in my study area in the basement that are just notebooks of the campaign. Everything from working on a conlang for my version of Dwarven, which my oldest son completed for me. Thank you. He also went on to make Goblin and a couple other artificial languages, constructed languages, to my initial notes on Skull Mountain, game notes, etc. I routinely will grab the current 1 or 2 active adventure notebooks and go through and summarize stuff into another notebook. I'll date it, the dates from and to, because every time I make notes, this is from this adventure on this real world date, this game date. Here's who was involved, and I'll transcribe it and have clean up, because I've got stuff like monster stats, etc., in the active notebooks, and have just the notes in another notebook, and then so it's pretty extensive. Let me put it this way: I told you I got a player who's been playing in the campaign 31 years. Her notes are so extensive herself to keep up that she's the one that runs Bridget, a 10th level barbarian who's been gaming and playing the campaign, I want to say, for 8 to 12 years. 8 years, I think. Her manila folder that holds the notes that she's taking as a character is 200 pages. Yeah.
Have you become a notebook and pen snob? Do you have you fallen into the trap of I must have this kind of pen or this kind of paper, or it's a writing instrument?
Actually, the opposite. I actually give me the cheapest stuff from Walmart, notebook wise. I just like old fashioned crystal Bics.
And have you started digitizing any of this, or is that even?
Yeah, I have. I've started digitizing a lot. I've actually all of my maps of all my campaign maps above ground are all digital now, and I can't say that all the major above ground campaign maps are digital, and I'm slowly but surely making everything digital. I've started trying to get some of the notes about Skull Mountain digital, but it's a daunting task because, look at this way, in the main, what I call the main stack of Skull Mountain, there are between what I call levels and sublevels, 28 of them. And then I'm going to say stuff here so my current players will hear this. There's the stuff I'm leaving off. The eastern caverns stretch 100 miles underground with 40 to 45 major sub areas. And the western warrens that they've seen already are another 15 miles with at least 10 more major areas. So there's a lot there. And I figured that if I could transcribe 20 pages a day, it'd probably be the rest of my life just to get that stuff digital.
You mentioned hiding some stuff from the current players. With something that's been going on this long with this many people, and you're going to be talking about it and excited about it because it's just a really cool thing that you've managed to accomplish here. Mm-hmm. How often do you find players who have spun up a new character or players who have just been talking with another player that you have to remind them, hey, your guy doesn't know that? How much of that? Hey, remember you don't use meta.
It's not really as common as you might think. It's only happened once in the last 6 or 7 years. And the players are usually very, very actively engaged in avoiding that sort of stuff. For example, the player that's in my desktop game and then goes over the Discord game has a lot of game knowledge that he very carefully isolates from the behavior of his PC in the Discord game, right? And when they make new characters, because I require all players to have at least 2 or 3 characters, and then we do what I call jazz band adventuring, if you've never heard of it.
Is it just you're picking randomly between the characters you have available to you, or
not randomly? Well, we were talking about the time clock earlier. Let's say that you've got 7 players, 4 of them together. They go off and they got these characters stuck in a dungeon, but they're already ahead in time because it took them 3 weeks to get there to the dungeon. So they're 3 weeks ahead of everybody else. The next time you meet, one of those players can't make it, but 2 other guys can. So you got 5 people. Okay, well, you got this window of time where you can do this stuff. So you get different characters. You run off and do another adventure and back and forth. So I'm usually tracking 4 or 5 sets. I would say I hesitate to use the word parties, but sets of players that are together in time at a time through the calendar and time clock of the world. So you have to mix and match a lot of times, and then people get synced up a lot. It's not like they're always isolated in time of 3 weeks ahead, whatever. Matter of fact, recently all the players got together and talked to each other to make sure all of them were synced up and the exact same time in the game world. It just is proof that they could do it because some of them had gone around the world to Yashima and sailed back, and that's 6 months each way, and blah blah blah. But because of the way that works, the players instinctively get to where they don't get share things that character wouldn't know. It seems instinctive, and they seem very involved in it, and it doesn't happen very much at all. Yeah.
So with 40 to 50 years of playing Dungeons and Dragons, what's the biggest pet peeve of what annoys Rick the most when it comes to gaming?
What annoys me the most? That's a tough one because I enjoy it as a hobby so much. I would say, and it's not, well, no, I guess it is. You sometimes have players, and I have not seen this personally in a long time. You sometimes have players that seem to want to antagonize other players. And I've always thought that was a huge no. This is my favorite hobby because it is a group event. You have a group of people getting together, and you have to cooperate in order to play the game and enjoy the game. And if you get a player coming in there and they get enjoyment out of annoying and upsetting people, you're not going to get together, and you're not going to play the game and enjoy the game. So I guess that would be my one pet peeve. Players that are there to annoy the table rather than play the game.
Is this going to become, you've mentioned a couple of times that like your sister was involved and your son's involved. Will this be a generational world, you think? So
my oldest son, Jack, actually has already flat out stated, and I've said he will get all the notes and everything when I retire or die. And he is dedicated to continuing the campaign. Absolutely. And his brother,
is there a battle to get out of the will? Or
I have 5 sons, and all of them are dedicated to when I retire or pass, they will continue the campaign as long as they can. Yeah.
That's really awesome.
Oh yeah.
Is there, besides the fact that you've got the campaign and the oodles and oodles of notes and material that goes around that, you've published some stuff as well. You've put out stuff on Drive-Thru. What of the products that you've put out into the world are you most kind of proud of? Like what is the feather in your cap, if you had to say, of things that you've published or put out into the world?
I would say, it's going to might surprise you, I'd say it's 2 things. One, it's a slim volume, but I'm very proud of its quality. I have a license setting for Hero Games Champions. It's called the Atlantaverse. As my children like to joke, Dad's got a 2nd edition campaign that's only 18 years old and a Champions campaign that's only 16 years old. What a loser. But the Atlantaverse, I was very proud of that I took the setting on the world I've been building for a superhero game for 15 years, and that Hero was kind enough to license it as a setting. So that's one of them. And the other one is I made a little book on RPG now called 5 Layers, and it's 5 monster locations with a couple unique monsters that I designed to be plugged into any old school game. And I have had so many people write to me and say, I really love that book, that it's really just, makes me get up in the morning. All right, I feel great. That book's really good.
That's awesome. You mentioned heroes. So you've played with superhero genres. Is there, when you leave the default fantasy genre of D&D and you look at some of the other genres that are out there, which ones do you find most compelling? I'm going to assume it's going to be superheroes now after what you just mentioned, but is there?
Yeah, almost certainly Champions. I've been playing Champions since 1985, and I've been running a continuous campaign for 15 going on 16 years of Champions. We had to migrate editions as the editions came out, which is fine because it's Champions, so it's not even hard. And two of my sons also run Champions campaigns of their own that are very different that I play in when I can. So Champions, but also you have to understand, I've been playing a long time. It's my number one hobby. We play a lot of Call of Cthulhu around here. When we can, we break out other editions of D&D. For example, right now, my oldest sons and I are I'm playing, one of them is dungeon mastering. We're going a full first level, 20th level, and 5th edition, so that we know what we're talking about when we talk about 5th edition. And did a lot of 3rd edition for a while. I own a Hackmaster 4th and Hackmaster 5th. I think that Hackmaster 4th should get more credit for helping spawn the OSR, because way back when it got the 1st edition rules back in your hands and was Game of the Year at Origin. Mm-hmm. And they really like, oh yeah, that's a great game. We should play that again. I've run Aftermath. I've played Aftermath. One of my sons does Aftermath, which is a fun, weird game. And of course, the game that I've had a full campaign, and I'm going to circle back to the question I asked earlier, for Rollmaster fantasy role-playing game for over 14 years, and can't get anybody to play. But I started Seaward as just, here's the city, here's the tower, here's the pirates. I did two others the other way around. Blackstone is my 2nd edition campaign, which has been going on, I can't believe it, but 18 years. It's been a hiatus for 2 years because of my illness. And I did the other way around. I did a world map and then filled it in. It took me about doing a world map and then a bunch of regional maps, cities, hundreds of NPCs. It took me about 4 months, all told. It was my first foray into doing everything digital. So everything in the game was digital from the beginning. And that's a ton of fun. So I've gone the other way around. And my Rollmaster setting again is top down, make everything first. But then my 3rd edition world that I made when 3rd edition came out and everyone was playing that, it was again, here's a town, here's a river, there's a mountain. So I find they both work really well. They're both fun.
So since you've got extensive experience with both, if somebody was coming in new, which way do you think is easier for them?
If you're new, start simple.
Small, bottom up.
Yeah. Because the biggest mistake you can do when you start large is make a mistake and not know until you're playing. And then you got to fix the whole planet, So if you're new, start small and get big, and it's just going to grow organically, and it's going to teach you a lot about what world building really is.
Have you or any of the players or anybody else that's involved looked at all this and said, "Hey, you should hand me some of these notes. I want to create a novel. I want to make a fiction that happened in this world, or a retelling of some events." Everybody seems to, a lot of world builders have that I want to also be an author bug in them. Has that kind of happened at all?
We've had that impetus. We've actually had some songs written in universe that people have actually written songs, like a bard or somebody has written a song. I've got a cassette tape which tells you how long ago this was, of some guys doing 4 or 5 campaign songs from back in the late 80s. And we've had some art done, like in-world art. This is the painting they made. And I've had some people do, I would call it microfiction about what happened. One of my players will write diary entries, journal entries for a character. And sometimes we posted those as blog entries just to keep everything straight for herself. But I started a bit of a short story set in Seaward years ago, and every now and then I'm like, I'll pull it out, put a couple more words down. But I do write a lot, and I write a fair amount of fiction, but I never really did any fiction about Seaward. So
it's funny you mentioned the cassette. I was earlier this week. I took my son to a flea market, a local flea market nearby, and we were going through the music section, and we were looking at everything from 8 tracks upward, and just he's only 9, and just him going, I pointed to the 8-tracks. I'm like, do you know what that is? And he goes, that's like the old video games where you clunk it. It's like, well, kind of. But it was kind of interesting watching. Like, he's like, he only had a few. Like, why only a couple of songs? What happens whenever you're done listening to those songs?
Yeah.
You see a whole different world.
Oh yeah, different planet. Where I try to explain to my kids, no, you don't understand. If you missed the movie in the theater, you never saw it.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so we've kind of gone over the main game and its impetus and where it's at now. What major event are you most looking forward to coming up in your world? Or
sure. So we get ready for inside baseball and in-world jargon. Not over the last couple of years at Game World, you had the Great Battle of Eagle Valley, which was a continuation of the Bandit Wars, where the various would-be bandit kings and bandit dukes along the southern fringe were defeated, including the dreaded Lord Whitehill. The closest we've come to a total party kill for a high-level party in a long time. It was down to, thank goodness, those 3 henchmen showed up. The Battle of Eagle Valley, which was one of the most amazing sessions we've ever done. At one point, in the middle of the discussion of it, I actually had a player who's a grown man say, "Can we get 15 minutes? I'm really emotionally involved in this." And I need to catch up. Everyone's like, "Yeah, we need a break." That's all finished, which ended the Bandit Wars, and Bridget conquered the Stone Hills, which was part of an orcish incursion. So we've had the borders of the civilization pushed back, 30, 40 miles to the south and to the west. But the orcish city-states beyond the Stone Hills appear to have finally fallen to what has been terrifying the players for about 8 real-world years. Of the shamans have taken over, are instituting a theocracy, and they're going to organize the otherwise hate each other more orcish city-states and march to Great War. So we're looking at breaking out the mass combat rules, the chainmail style mass combat rules, and having an actual war in the West within the next real-world year, probably.
I often end up these interviews by asking a person what I have not yet asked them. But I kind of feel with just the scope, the amount of things that I couldn't possibly have asked must be huge. So what I'll ask instead is, you mentioned a couple of times that RPGs are your main hobby, and that's it's what you love to do. What other hobbies do you have that have influenced it, or when you just need to take a step away from it for a few minutes, what are the other hobbies that you fall back to?
Sure. I do. I'm a voracious reader, and I don't do as much now, but I watch a lot of movies. So I tend to watch a lot of classic movies, read a lot of classic books. The Matter of France, the Peers of Charlemagne, the stories of the paladins, Charlemagne, were something I was reading before I started playing D&D, massively influential upon my game. Edgar Rice Burroughs, massively influential upon my game. But oddly enough, when I need to take a break and gather my mind, I actually have an embarrassing amount of equipment and such associated with grilling, smoking, and sausage making.
There's nothing wrong with that. Everybody loves a good meat.
I've got like 2 grills. I've got a massive nonstick griddle. I've got a smoker. I've got 3 smokers, and sausage stuff. And I do a lot of, I'll do a lot of cooking to de-stress.
So how many Dungeon Master pun aprons have been given to you over the years, son?
Oddly enough, none. I get a lot of funny aprons, but never one about D&D. I should mention that to the kids since Father's Day is coming up. But if I'm not inside or on the deck with pen, pad, computer working on D&D, I'm out back with my hat on, an apron, and I'm cooking something. Yeah,
good stuff. The have you ever published out or thought about putting out your Appendix N? So you mentioned that there was a bunch of books that were.
It's interesting. We have to give props. Jeffro Johnson wrote his book on Appendix N, which was his blog post, and well done, Jeffro. Bravo. He made a lot of people go back and look at those classic books, and I can't stress. It seems common now that everyone talks about Appendix N, but he really got that ball rolling like 10 years ago. Back online, just yelling about it. Appendix N, Appendix N. A couple of years ago, he and I were talking, and he said the same thing. You should work on that. I actually do have a nonfiction book mostly done, which I'm calling Secrets of Seaward, and I hesitate to call it my Appendix N, simply because I don't want to, claim that this is as influential to the hobby as a whole. Because it's not, it's just about me. But Secrets of Seaward, I'm talking about a bunch of classic books and a handful of classic movies, and specifically how they impacted my campaign. And again, I'm mostly done, almost dying a couple times in 3 years, sort of put the nose back foot. But I do plan to get that out in the future when I get to it. Yeah.
So you guys keep making saving throws, and will there be a Kickstarter for it, or would it be something that you would just self-publish directly, like through Amazon?
I'd probably just put it out directly on
drive-through or something.
Amazon. Yeah, just very directly. Maybe Lulu. Yeah.
Where can people find? So if they want to stay up to date on what's happening in the campaign, or if they want to hear when a future book like that may come out, where would they go to find all your?
Sure, I've actually got off a lot of social media not too long ago. The best bet is my Discord, Don't Split the Party. I have a blog called Don't Split the Party. It's at harbingergames.blogspot.com. There is a link there to the Discord. The Discord is very active, and if you want to know anything that's coming out there, I've got stuff on RPG Now. I actually have been selling stuff on RPG Now since 2002, which is a long time now. It was drive-through, drive-through back then, and then those are the two big places.
All right, I'll include links to all those down in the show notes. My last question for you is, because I'm sure there's got to be some sort of a story with it. You mentioned it way earlier in here, and it's something that I feel modern gamers kind of missed out on, is that joy of getting of having a magazine subscription, or going down to the local bookstore and grabbing a copy of Dungeon or Dragon. Did you ever write into the editors? Ever have anything published in there? Or if not, what is kind of like your favorite?
I did make a proposal to Dragon Magazine in 1991 that they said, get a hold of us in 6 months, and we'll talk about it. And 6 months later, I was newly married and changing careers, and so it never happened. But I would think of there's so many good articles in Dragon Magazine, so many. I would say the one that impacted me the most was one of the logistics of armies way back in the early 80s that really reinforced to me that I was, as a young man, that I was correct, that it was a resource management game. We had to pay attention to it. So that's a huge impact, but I think the really good one, I would have to say, the Archer Ranger. The Archer Ranger, Dragon Magazine number 45, really made me think about the fact that it would be easy. It would be not easy, but it was possible to make your own custom character classes that fit and were balanced, and prompted me. And then I've gone on and made several of my own. Yeah,
it's amazing to me that you're able to remember the exact year and edition of it. I've got a memory that's like a goldfish. If I don't have notes on stuff, I can't remember squat. So when people are able to just to pop that out, I'm like, wow, you're a wizard. But thank you so much for taking some time and chatting.
Well, it means so much to have me on here. Thank you so much. I'd love to do it again in the future.
For sure. Yeah, like I said, the just the amount of the scope is almost impossible to try to get into an hour. But I hope folks were able to take something away from this, and they go and check out on the Discord, and that your health continues to improve, and you're able to get that second game going and everything else. So yeah, thank you very so much for coming on and talking with me.
Thanks again for having me. And you have a good day.
You as well.
Take care.
All right, folks, that's going to wrap up this episode of the Red Caps podcast. I hope you enjoyed, you learned something, and that you are eager to come back for more. www.theredcaps.net has all the links to all the ways that you can contact me, and I'd love to hear from you. Thank you ever so much for listening, and remember, never let your caps dry out. Stay safe, have fun, we'll talk again soon. Take care.